down here, so
Yeah.
bring it out. And then I'll fill it in.
Yes, it's in Ypres, in Belgium.
Yeah. Oh, it's in Belgium?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I just thought there was an...
Well, it's all along the French-Belgian border. It's
Yeah.
Flanders to Picardy.
And just let me know when you're speeding.
We're speeding.
Oh, we're speeding. Okay. Well, let's start with a general statement, and you're probably in a good position to answer this because you are of many cultures. Do you think there is an American style of politics, political discourse?
I think there's a distinctively American style of politics that can be identified both in substance and in style. The style is well known internationally. It's actually now quite widely emulated. That's to say, razzmatazz, bands, balloons, rallies that are prearranged, photo ops. Well, it's entered the international language. The Israelis have their elections like that. Even the Russians have their elections now quite like that. The British more and more have their elections in that style. And the substance is one where the whole aim, despite the dramatization of the events, is to create consensus. That's to say, to exclude issues that can, so to speak, divide people. And the encapsulating remark is that in elections, most people run against the politics of division, which is, so to speak, a negation of the whole idea, because politics is division by definition.
Well, do you think that ill serves Americans, or what do you think, why do you think that's the way?
Well, yes, I think it's a pity, in other words, that elections should be so completely divorced from politics. Politics being, excuse me.
You just
I think obviously it's to be regretted if the electoral process becomes totally divorced from politics, if we define politics as the art by which people achieve self-government. Elections are nothing to do with government at all. They may sometimes choose some of the people who take part in government, but they don't determine any of the principles by which that's done, or any of the methods by which it's done. And increasingly, it seems to me, elections are referenda or plebiscites conducted by politicians to validate decisions or positions that have already been made or taken. Thus, they're not even really a spectator sport, because there's a sinister element of participation. It's passive. People are being conscripted into a process that they are not allowed to fully understand.
What is it that you find appealing? You've been writing about American politics for quite some time. What is it that you find appealing about it, or fascinating, or appalling? What rings your bell?
Well, I suppose that what interests me is here's a society.
Let me just wait for a second.
Oh dear.
Go ahead.
Are we really going to hear those kind of things?
I didn't hear it at all.
Yeah,
I was just worried that it was going to.
Yeah. Okay.
The United States is a country so various and dramatic that no one person can ever claim to have seen all of it. No one person ever will be able to. It's full of colour and incident. There's everything, just take this year, everything from the Million Man March to the militia movement and so on. And huge conflicts, a society very much divided, and very much divided against itself. And politics manages to exclude all of this completely. By the time an election is conducted, any of this drama, colour, struggle, incident, texture, has been completely bled out of the picture. And one ends up with a certain kind of pre-selected consensus candidate, or candidates, who are bound and determined to make sure that nothing disturbing can intrude on the picture.
Do you think that's true? I mean, I would probably say that's certainly true of the national elections. Do you think that's true in smaller, local races, gubernatorial races, city council races?
I should try and comprise your question in my answer, shouldn't I?
Yeah, it should be, yeah.
Yes.
It should be clear what you're
Yes, of course, at the national level, where the hold of consensus, the hold of consensus and of management and of smooth-running operators is not as great at the local level as it is at the national one. I remember, for example, going to the gubernatorial election in Louisiana a couple of years ago where David Duke had managed to secure the Republican nomination, and in New Orleans on the final day there was no question that there was an election going on and that there was quite a lot at stake in it and people minded sort of pretty passionately about it. What was sad, I found, was that all the same, by the time the polls had closed, everyone knew what the result was. There was no moment of going to a bar. I went to a David Duke bar, hoping to see the results come in, you know, among his supporters and see the atmosphere change as the different precincts reported and all of that kind of thing that I think is the lifeblood of democratic politics. And of course the exit polls had told us everything we knew before we got the first drink down. So I found that was sad because, again, it gave more than the impression somehow that everything was being run in a parallel universe.
Now, if you talk to people who work in politics, as I'm sure you know many of them, they love this stuff. I mean, they are many of them upright people, and but they're passionate about this. They will move off to Nebraska to work on a campaign, you know, at the drop of a hat, you know, for not a lot of money. They're getting something out of it. Yet the general public seems to have a completely different, you know, different attitude towards the political system, or at least that's what we've been told. How do you account for that?
Just as the election often seems to take place in a parallel universe, people who work in politics are a breed and race apart. That's another symptom of what I mean. There are those who are in politics and those who are not. There's no sense that politics derives from the electorate or politics derives from society. There are politicians and there are political animals and operatives. I know people who live for campaigns, who go anywhere for a campaign, who indeed make their living that way. The money is sometimes very good. It's not always very good. The starting rates aren't very great, but the rewards can be enormous. They love number crunching. They love to do exit polls. They love to do opposition research. They have a private language, of course. It's quite well expressed in a movie by Richard Gere called Power. I don't know if you've seen it, about the life of a Washington political operative. They're very adaptable. They'll work for any old campaign. If you wanted a good example of such a person who's actually one of the very few who's been able to invest this little wonkish world with star quality, George Stephanopoulos is a very good example. He was looking for a candidate about 5 years ago. He was pretty sure Bush could be defeated. He decided he wanted the candidate to be a Democrat. He was prepared to go work for Gephardt. He had worked for Dukakis. He ended up working for Clinton. It was, in a sense, all the same to him. He was just looking for a campaign he could join. Now, Washington has thousands of these people, and I don't think that those who, in the end, get to vote have any idea of the life of those who decide what it is they're going to be voting about, if anything.
Do you think people like that, who essentially are, you know, campaign gypsies, do issues matter to them, or are they basically just looking for a candidate who can win? I mean, what's more important for these people?
A thing that has often struck me in talking to the professional policy wonk or campaign gypsy is how little it matters to them, even if their candidate should win or not. I remember particularly having this feeling in the closing days of the Dukakis campaign. Various people in Washington had been drafted in, often from other senatorial campaigns, to work for Dukakis. If you talk to them about the upcoming debate with Bush and said, look, if you got Dukakis to stress...
Hold on one second.
Sorry.
Just wait a minute, Paul. Don't calm down.
I can do that again.
Okay, yeah.
No, I could feel that...
Specific, like about Stephanopoulos, even though it was a good point, I think it's going to be too specific for
You think so?
A bit.
I thought I could risk it because he is such a well-known guy.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's just...
To have a name like that and to have name recognition is actually quite surprising.
The sort of thing, Chris, that we use is that Stephanopoulos will never be a character in this film.
Right.
He'll have like...
George, in fact, does have a few convictions.
I think they all do, but I think that they're also pragmatic. Some of them probably don't. No.
I mean, really amazingly few.
Yeah. Let me know when you're speeding again. Okay. All right, where were we?
We were talking about if people actually care.
You see, I was going to use David Gergen as an example as well.
Yeah.
Is that no good?
Yeah, it's going to be too specific.
Oh gosh.
But
well, okay, I'll have to. I mean, I can be general, but I always feel I need to ram home with an example. Okay, well, shall I do that one again?
Yeah, why don't we, yeah, just talk about, you know, issues and convictions among the people who work in campaigns.
It might be unfair to say, or it might seem unfair to say, that some of these professional campaign political junkies, gypsies, wonks, whatever you wish to term them, have no convictions. I'm sure that they must have privately. I mean, it's very hard to conceive of a human being who doesn't. But what you can say, I think, is how little those convictions matter, often to them, in how they select which candidate they're going to work for, or how they're going to present that candidate in point of fact. I can remember very vividly in the closing stages of the Bush-Dukakis race, a number of people were being drafted in to the campaign, often from other campaigns, other states, other democratic resources. Came into Washington. I went to parties where they were. I would say to them, look, in this upcoming debate between Dukakis and Bush, if the candidate was to say this, he could really put Bush in a defensive posture, or if he said that, he could really embarrass him. I realized they weren't listening at all. It wasn't because of my boring, droning, hypnotically dull delivery. It was because I was completely missing the point of the campaign. The point was entirely one of packaging, presentation, and so forth. And they would have been willing to do this for any candidate at all. And many of them indeed were talking about what their next campaign was going to be, it having become obvious to them that this was a loser, something they just had to work out their contract on, then go find someone else to work for. It's like certain seedlings actually spread themselves this way and pollinate in this manner by attaching themselves to the fleece of a passing dog or sheep and in that way distributing themselves. Well, it's not unlike.
What are they doing? Why are they doing it then?
If we just shut that intervening door, I think there'll be no more.
Okay. Okay, so they're, you know, so why do they do it? If not to, you know, press their views on a wider public?
Mr. Ward Just, one of the very few novelists ever to be produced by Washington, once wrote a Washington novel with the title Honor, Power, Riches, Fame, and the Love of Women. These, the supposed rewards or the ambitions of every man at any rate. I don't think many of those things come to the professional politician, though it is possible to enrich yourself, of course, or the professional political operative. I think they do it because I really actually sometimes, I mean, I'm asking myself now, of the ones I know, I find it very difficult to imagine now. So I'm free associating, which is useless to you. I think that they do it for the vicarious connection with power. I think that for them, just that picture, perhaps on the piano in later years, where there's the candidate making his acceptance speech and off to the left is someone who no one's bothered to identify in the caption, and that's them. I think that's enough. For some people, that's the really high point in their life. I think there are people who like to be first with the news. Probably one of the few advantages of the job is that if you live in Washington, you work on this kind of campaign, you live in that sort of world, very often you don't have to rely on the newspapers for information. And that is a nice feeling. And when you read the papers, you realize you know more than they do. You can tell your relatives things in advance and your friends. There is a thrill to that, and I think it's very addictive too. In other words, the idea of having that oxygen cut off would always seem an appalling one. And as a result, people are willing to switch parties as well as candidates if necessary in order to stay in the game, and I can think of many people who have. But
would you say that it's a generally you know, amoral profession or cynical profession? Or those are different things. But, I'm speaking about politics generally, not just the behind-the-scenes people.
Well, like every profession, the question comes. As with every profession, the question is bound to arise: does this profession have any professional ethics to it? Well, no, really, because they would all have to say, if they were honest. And they will all say, actually, even if you don't ask them, that winning isn't the main thing, it's the only thing. And that really in politics is absolutely true, because there's no place for the person who comes in second, no rewards, lobbyists will not call, campaign donations will cease to arrive, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's in that sense completely unethical. And, well, no, I'll hold it to that, I think.
Yet, the country, on a certain level, functions fine. I mean, people sometimes feel like their needs are met and they're represented. So is there something about the system that's working? Is it generally designed to just work this way and be a mess, but still, soldier on?
There's a very famous description of democracy and the democratic process, or the state of democracy, by Winston Churchill, in which he compares democracy to a waterlogged raft. So it's very sluggish. It's very hard to get it to move anywhere or do anything. But it's very, very, very hard indeed to sink it. So in many ways there's an appealing mediocrity to American politics. And in my opinion, an appealing indifference on the part of most people to the way in which it's carried on. Most people, as the opinion polls repeatedly confirm, are stupendously ignorant. Very few people can name their congressman, for example, as a simple matter of fact. Very few people cannot be budged on an issue if the question is very slightly altered. Their answers will come out differently. They're almost contemptibly easy to manipulate. And nothing can be more disgusting than overhearing opinion poll experts tell you how they can achieve and condition a result from a semi-inert, or shall we say, not to be condescending ourselves, very malleable and suggestible electorate. And of course, it's also very well known that the figures fluctuate, but it can be nearly half, and sometimes more, don't bother to vote at all, and don't even register to do so. Every now and then the pundits will publish articles deploring this and saying people are too cynical about politics. My view is that if people believed in this process any more than they do, there would be cause for alarm. The cynicism level has got to be kept very high, otherwise we would have to accuse ourselves of deliberately fleecing people and taking them for a ride.
Now, we have actually encountered places, there are places in America where politics really is something that everyone does get involved in. The turnouts tend to be higher. Louisiana, where we lived for 10 years, is one of those places. There's like places in Rhode Island. You could argue that that kind of involvement also goes hand in hand with a sort of a general corruption. But in fact, people are more involved. There's much less...
Louis, I'm hearing a lot of rubbing all of a sudden in the microphone.
Well, you want to...
Oh, I see one.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm crossing my arm the wrong way. Sorry.
Places where there really is a lot of involvement in politics, the level of cynicism is high. I mean, it's correct. Of course, he's a crook. He's a politician. That was certainly the case in Louisiana. Nevertheless, everyone was involved. Everybody knew not only who their congressman was, but who their assessor was. I mean, they elected. They had 8 assessors for the city of New Orleans. It was a very sort of election-heavy place. Do you have any idea why that might be? I mean, let me sort of. I'm just free associating here too, because in fact one of the commonplaces of the pundits is that, oh gee, it's cynical, it's apathetic, this is bad for America.
Yes. To the naively expressed pundit view that it's a pity there's so much cynicism, there's an equally naive implied corollary, which is that if there was more enthusiastic popular participation, everything would be healthier. Actually, there's no correlation at all between political participation and political health. We have before us, or only recently behind us, the examples of Tammany Hall and the Boss Tweed machine in New York. Very recently, the Cook County Democratic Party in Illinois. Big turnout, a lot of participation, great deal of corruption, great deal of jobbery, great deal of demagogy, great deal of palm greasing, and also a great deal of unthinking machine partisanship. Just a matter of getting out the votes, as you know, live or dead, etc., registered or unregistered, vote early, vote often. All of these are signs of high participation. There are a couple of towns in America where that still goes on, notoriously. And there is one town where it seems to me there's a very high level of participation and a fairly low level of corruption. And that's San Francisco, where politics is still quite a big local deal, and everyone finds it even quite enjoyable, and it's quite colourful, and issues are discussed, and people even go from door to door canvassing, for heaven's sake, on propositions sometimes, which are a California speciality, as well as at election time. So, but with that With that shining exception, I think one would have to say that participation and health are often inversely related.
Let's talk about not necessarily San Francisco specifically, but one of the things that struck me, I've been out there a lot during elections. I have a lot of friends who live there. And it goes back to the whole thing about winning is the most important thing in politics. And I certainly where a lot of what I would consider to be somewhat idealistic campaigns that go on in San Francisco in some of the propositions. It's to advance a particular point of view. And there is often a kind of an ideological purity test that sometimes reigns in situations like that. And so when they lose, which often happens when the propositions are too pure, there's a real kind of dissatisfaction with the process. And that seems to me to be a fundamentally misunderstanding about how the process actually works.
Well, I think I'd have to ask you to go on to say what you meant by ideological purity.
Well, I just noticed, for example, in San Francisco and in Berkeley, Santa Monica, I tend to know the left examples, although I think it also exists on the right, and we're seeing that with anti-abortionists, where if you stake out a position on an issue because you believe in it, and you don't widen your possible catchment of votes, then you end up sort of being right on the issue, but you don't end up winning. And for some people, that's the point. And yet, it seems that our political system does not reward that kind of approach. That's one of the reasons why it seems to me why the national campaigns are so bland and you know, they in fact, because they're in to win, they're not in there to necessarily make a political point, or else you're like Pat Buchanan, who's going to, you know.
But if you like, I'll come at it from a completely different angle, but I will.
Sure, well, that's fine. I mean, whether you agree or disagree, but
but you'll wonder if I'm speaking to your point, but I think I am.
Okay.
In my country of origin, which never known it to fail, have you?
What is it?
That's a new one, though. I was thinking we usually get more sirens.
Oh, okay.
And quite often choppers at this height. Yeah, okay, when you're ready.
Okay.
In my country of origin, which perhaps you can tell is England, politics is organized rather more dialectically. That's to say, apart from the fact that parties are much more class-based in Britain, we're brought up, the Oxford Union Debating Society, the shape of the chamber in Westminster where the benches face one another directly, Prime Minister's question time, debate, disagreement, confrontation almost. A lot of that is more apparent than real, but it does set a tone. In the United States, the whole effort of politics, and you can tell it from the shape of the Senate chamber and the House chamber, is one of the search for agreement, the search for common ground, the search for consensus. No one has ever seen, or not in my lifetime, a really colourful debate going on in any of these places. They're there as sort of management committees of the consensus. And of course they're also there to raise a great deal of money and then redistribute it more near to their own heart's desire. This means that at election times, again, the prize goes to the person who can most convincingly appear to be all things to all men. It's not by chance. That's considered to be a great skill in this country.
It's okay. We'll just wait.
That's a wonderful comment. If we can try to get that again, because the siren started pretty early. Sorry.
So where would you like me to start? Do you want to do the whole thing again?
Sure.
Let's try it again. It was good.
Yeah, okay.
I think most of it was actually probably usable.
Yeah.
But
I was wondering if I took too long clearing the throat about Britain. Maybe not.
Yeah, maybe let's get to the.
In my country of origin, which you can probably tell is England, things are very slightly different in that you can tell from the shape of the chamber in Westminster, the House of Commons, where the benches face each other and the two parties confront, that the idea of cut and thrust, debate, confrontation and so on, though it can be more apparent than real, is at any rate the style. It's what sets the tone. Very, very different in the United States. Look again at the shape of the chamber in the Senate or the House. It's round. You can't tell from where anyone sits, so to speak. There is an aisle, but you don't look at anyone across it. Everyone's facing, as it were, towards the middle. And metaphorically, that gives you a rough idea that the search for consensus dominates these meetings. No one can remember in this generation, a colourful debate going on in the Senate. That's not the point of meeting there. The point of meeting there is to have a general management committee for the consensus. That and to raise a great deal of money and to redistribute it, of course, to the friends and supporters of each participant. Elections, therefore, become a search for common ground, and pundits will award and do award points to the person who can most convincingly persuade every elector that he or she is represented by the said candidate. Bill Clinton, it was obvious to me, earned his title as frontrunner, a title he got before a single vote had been cast. Please note, a title conferred on him before any American had dropped a single ballot or pulled a single lever, precisely because of his ability to be protean, to be all things to all men and women. And it isn't, therefore, by chance that that's rated as America's highest political skill. Then people complain that politics is too bland, that politics is too samey, politics is too boring. If you ask, say, a Ross Perot supporter, wake him up if you have to. No, don't. Just stop him or her on the street and say, don't you think that parties in America spend much too much time bickering among themselves rather than getting on with the nation's business? There's too much partisanship. The person will say yes. I'll guarantee that he will. Leave a few more questions in between so the trick isn't too obvious, and then ask him, don't you think the two major parties are much too much alike? He will infallibly reply yes to that too. And in fact, it's very unclear very often when you have movements that say they want a third party. It's very unclear to many people why they always fail. One reason why they always fail is we don't yet have two parties. So third-party movements, I think, will fail by definition.
Christopher, can I throw something in right over here?
Yeah.
What do you say to the person that says, hey, our political system is dealing with the great issues of the time? I mean, we're debating, gay marriages. We're debating, the future of public television. We're debating abortion. Aren't those the great issues of the day?
Yes, it's a good question.
Let's wait for the bus.
It can be... It can be said, as I said earlier, about the immense drama and variety and colour of American life and politics and society. It can be said, look, issues get debated all right. Passionate exchanges on abortion, for example. Tremendous quarrel at the moment over affirmative action. An amazing, in the eyes of the rest of the world, struggle over homosexual marriage. Much else besides. You can name your own favourite issue. Certainly these things get discussed. They don't come up in elections, though. The whole instinct of candidates in the presidential year is to make sure that an issue dies before it can become something that might conceivably upset his or her apple cart. Mr. Clinton's first move when the gay marriage question came up was to say, just give me a bill and I'll put this whole issue to sleep. I want it out. The same with, I'll now have to think what the other issue is where that just happened. Sorry.
Yeah, welfare.
Yeah. Welfare, yes.
Affirmative action.
The Wisconsin thing, yeah.
Candidates spend a great deal of time making certain that issues are knocked on the head before they can disturb an electorate or disturb a campaign. It's the ability to do that is a very highly prized ability in a party manager. Taking an issue out of politics, making sure that it doesn't become a partisan question. And you notice if you look at the language that what is being admitted here is that there is in effect a one-party system, and there's a party of permanent power and influence, a Washington party, a Beltway party, that in other words, that the cliches about that are widely believed around the country happen to be true.
Now, actually, we're going to change tape, and you anticipate my next question. I just want to make sure that it's not particularized to the Beltway. You can say Washington, but then it's duplicated in 50
Could I speak about Washington as a political community, I mean as a city, as an example, or you don't want me to be that specific? You want to put this out?
It's up to you, no, you can.
Okay. It's happened in other societies, excuse me, it's happened in other modern societies and at other times that permanent governments, permanent oligarchies or elites, or semi-dictatorships even like General de Gaulle's early regime in France, would never dream of dispensing with elections. Indeed, they quite like having elections. The one they particularly like is a referendum or a plebiscite, where the issue is determined in advance and you can say yes or no to it. Well, of course, everyone says you couldn't possibly imagine that happening in the land of the free and in the home of the brave, and I don't think it has happened yet, but I think there is more truth to the comparison than many people would be quite ready to admit. If you look at just this year, this presidential year, by the time most primary voters had a chance to exercise their franchise, the candidate had already been chosen. There wasn't, in fact, anything to vote about, and there certainly was no issue. In Washington, D.C., which is a city as well as a political community, and it's an actual society. We don't have anyone in Congress, but we do have primaries. It was actually proposed to cancel the primary to try and save some money, because there wasn't anything to vote about. Then it was thought how that would look bad. I mean, for the look of the thing, we can't have the nation's capital saying, let's cancel the election for lack of funds, lack of interest. So there was a primary, and 11,000 people in the nation's capital turned out. Now, that's less than what pollsters would call, because I love the way they use this term, the margin of error. Do you know of any other science, by the way, or pseudoscience that determines what its own margin of error can be and tells you in advance? It's quite extraordinary and is accepted for doing so. But maybe I'm wandering from the point. The fact is that elections are about themselves. They take place in a parallel universe. They're run by a special and distinct class of person. And the electorate is simply the raw material for this demonstration effect, for this referendum and plebiscite on the status quo.
Now talk about that was excellent. Talk about what the status quo is. I mean, who's in the status quo?
If you wanted to draw, there used to be a competition. I think it was started by Richard Reeves to discover who was this year's chairman of the board of the American establishment. For many years, it was won by a guy who no one had heard of, which made it all the better. John J. McCloy was definitely the chairman of the board of the American establishment. Some people used to think it was Henry Kissinger, but probably if it's someone you've heard of, it's not the right guy. The permanent political class, power class in Washington, is composed of, or would have to include, at any rate, if this is not exhaustive, it's inclusive, the Defense Department and everything that goes under the generic title of the procurement community, as I've actually heard it called, vulgarly termed the military-industrial complex by President Eisenhower. The legal community, especially the trial lawyers, the people whose offices are on K Street, the law firms to which politicians retire when they're out of office and plan their comebacks. That's where they go to roost. The lobbying firms, which can always offer a politician money, which is not wrongly described as the mother's milk of politics, though it's not described as such with sufficient embarrassment, in my opinion. These lobbying firms are tremendously important, and they can convince legislators that they've gone into the wrong profession. You know, why don't you come in and be with us? They would have, this map would have to include, well, sorry, I'm just running out of steam there, which is bad.
Okay, that's okay. We give military industrial, you have lawyers,
Yes.
you have lobbyists, obviously business.
Mhm.
I mean, you didn't mention that. Do you want to,
Yeah, there
take
are,
a minute?
well, yes. I mean, when the word lobby perhaps needs a little bit of unpacking. Almost every business worthy of the name in the United States has its own Antonio.
She's being very good.
Yeah, she's very good.
I mean, really.
The word lobby, which is on everyone's lip, probably could stand a little unpacking. Every business interest in the United States worthy of the name either has or is its own lobby. And everyone knows you can walk down what they call Gucci Gulch in the Senate, where the lobbyists wait in their spangled loafers to catch the elbow and seldom fail. And you can say, there's the guy who's with tobacco, there's the guy with the National Association of Manufacturers, there is the guy who represents Lockheed or Grumman, and it's very well understood indeed. And you know which table they have in which restaurant as well, if you care enough to know about this kind of thing. So you'd have to include them in the permanent government. Then there are the professional political consultants. These people are very important, and they come in at a very high price increasingly, and they stay in Washington all year round. And politicians come and go, but they come and go to see these guys. And then increasingly important, I think, and increasingly a thing unto itself, is the opinion poll industry. You might think it's being overestimated as a force in politics. As a matter of fact, if anything, it's being underestimated.
Just keep going. I'm not hearing.
You're not, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's in the background, but I don't think
I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to take, for example, the effect of the opinion poll industry on my own profession, it used to be that newspapers would hesitate to commission opinion polls of their own, would hesitate to publish opinion poll results, especially when a vote was close, and would certainly hesitate to put them on the front page or put reporters' bylines on them as if they were actual news. Now, without any hesitation at all, any newspaper that's short of a story any day can simply make one up. They can commission their own poll, they put their own reporters' names on it, and very often the swing or trend. Oh, fuck. I thought we'd. Darling!
No, why don't we? I think we're getting.
Too specific.
We're getting.
Okay.
I'm worried about
Right.
we're getting a little too specific.
I think if we were moving more towards, again, this idea that there is a political class, and if the political class really isn't affected by elections,
Yeah.
and just what, you know, and that's a little bit simpler and probably closer to what we're dealing with. Louis, I don't know if you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm trying to. The problem, we're interviewing you at a stage in the production where we have a lot of material already assembled, so we want to play to our strengths.
Yep.
This has
And
been very good so far, by the way.
I'm sure you say that to all the guys.
Well,
he says it. He says it's all.
Well, I'll show you.
What I'm trying to get is we have this marvelous scene in Texas, okay,
Yes.
with the lobbyists.
Right.
You know, the camera. They let the camera onto the floor of the state Senate and the state
Wow.
House, and you can get everybody's arm twisting and
Yeah.
all that. You know, and it's
Put
wonderful.
mics on his
And it's wonderful. So to hear you commenting on, you win an election, you come to the
Talk about that as a permanent campaign.
that's fine.
That's fine.
That's
actually better.
that's great. Yeah.
If you are Mr. or Mrs. American voter, then elections are a seasonal thing in your life. You know to expect a presidential one every 4 years. Everybody knows how to do that. The more highly evolved political animals know what the periodicity of Senate and House races, and even the local ones are. But there they are, they come and go. For the political class, the campaign is permanent. It's always election time. It starts the day you're elected. You have to start amassing, for one thing, your treasury for the next run. And that means a very great sense of discrimination in the sort of attention you'll pay to who, and to whom, and for what. And that's the second nature of politicians. It's as natural as breathing, and you can see it on their faces, in my opinion. It's also true of the political consultants, of the law firms and the lobbyists. Every day is election day for them. And that, I think, is why they hold all the cards when it comes around to the time for participation to be invited. Now it's your turn. We've given you an election. The least you can do is vote in it. I hope that doesn't sound too cynical, or rather, I hope it does.
Well, it does sound cynical. It does sound cynical. And why should somebody who's, I don't know, 20 years old, maybe working class, doesn't at this point have a bright outlook? Why should they then participate at all? I mean, should they just stay home? Or I mean, what's the alternative? If they're not about, should they go out and foment a revolution? What's the
The latter, obviously. The beauty of the arrangement is its apparent openness. Anyone can join. American elections are for all, and an argument which everyone knows is worn as smooth as a pebble is, well, if you don't like it, you can vote the other way, or start your own party, or run yourself. And many people have tried it, and very, very few have succeeded because they don't know, and you don't know till you get into it, what the odds are and how well arranged the game has for a long time been. But of course, it would be wrong to try and convince people that there was nothing they could do. There was a sense that, no, well, I think I want to leave it there, actually.
but seriously though, it's like if what is one to do if the system is stacked, is the system stacked against you, or does something sort of trickle through? A revolution is probably not going to be a real feasible answer in this country. I mean, we've been much closer to it before than we have nowadays. And,
maybe this is just the way it is.
Maybe just the way it is. Well, it used to be, I'm not a communitarian, but it used to be that there were other levels of political participation in American life. There were labor unions, for example, very important. There were civic associations, local and neighborhood initiatives, giving much more than the illusion of participation, very often giving people actual control over at least the immediate facts of their lives and experiences. Something about postmodern America seems to have abolished, or at any rate very greatly eroded, even the sense of community from which such a participation could be expected to arise. Partly it's a physical fact. I mean, the way that roads have been built, for example, has had a tendency to break up what used to be traditionally called tightly knit communities, to separate citizens rather from one another. The way that work has evolved is to make it much less a collective undertaking. As it happens also, at the present time, the discipline of scarcity and of unemployment means that people who go to work are principally worried about keeping that job and are not inclined to, as it were, get a name for being a troublemaker at the office or at the plant, or wherever it may be. In other words, if you are someone like myself, who comes from a radical tradition, who believes in the possibility of collectively organized, revolutionary, democratic effort, and you look out over the social landscape, it's difficult not to believe that somehow isolation is your fate.
now, one could argue, however, that there are groups today which, in many ways, do provide that collective action. They just happen to be on the right, and they happen to be religious. But
Yes.
there's certainly, and we've come across them, you know, like people in Minnesota, they were never in politics. They get energized by a candidate or by an issue, usually abortion, of course, and they're very much, it's mom and pop, and it may be the labor unions of the 90s.
Yes.
You know?
Now one would have to make one exception, I think, to the what the communitarians bemoan as the decline of the bowling leagues and the decline of participation in civic and communal life. And that grand exception would be the churches. This cuts both ways, but I mean, if you go to the A&E, not the A&E, sorry, I'll start again. It's African, AME.
AME.
So
That's a
channel,
table chat TV channel.
I knew as soon as I said it. I'll start again, I looked in the camera. There's one very salient exception to what communitarians lament, that's to say the decline of everything from labor unions to bowling leagues to all the things that used to make up a Norman Rockwell sense of a social America, and that's the churches. The churches are a tremendous mobilizer. They're where a lot of initiatives begin, and they're the locus where a lot of the debates actually take place. If you're running in Los Angeles, in fact, if you're running in California at all, you'd be silly not to go to the AME church, for example, and see real old-style African-American energy, political, spiritual, being mobilized. And historical, too, traditional, cultural, a lot. Music, shout and holler. People used to hearing long speeches, disappointed if the preacher isn't in good voice. Great stuff. The same is true in large areas of the country, also for the conservative wing, where the organization of piety is one of the first things that they have to be good at. Knowing how to play the old-time gospel. Knowing what strikes people as moral issues of life and death. Abortion, obviously, is the most common of these, but, excuse me, I'll stop. Abortion is obviously the best known of these and probably the most intoxicating. But issues of values, how the children are raised, how traditions are passed on, how traditions are inculcated, and also how communities define themselves. People wanting to, no, I'm petering out.
Okay. Well, let's just back. Let's put.
I'd only be repeating myself.
Well, no, that was fine. But let's put an ending on that. Is that, well, that to me, I mean, my observation is that with those people now finding themselves in full voice or fuller voice than they used to, they are influencing elections. They are getting their candidates in, which of course is not necessarily the benefit of those of us who don't believe in their values,
yeah.
But nevertheless, the system, such as it is, actually appears to be working for them. It is working on a grassroots level. I mean,
yes. The potency of church or piety-based politics is this. Not only is it very good at election times in mobilizing people, getting them out to vote, giving them a sense that morals and ethics are issues in the campaign, whether they are or not, and in giving them a sense of their own identity, not just for themselves but as against others. But they also fulfill the, oh, for heaven's sake.
you can just, don't worry, really, just ignore it. We'll tell you if it's like out of control.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I always think that you'll always give it the extra couple of seconds and then stop. So.
Oh, okay. Just because you never know.
I know. Start again. The potency and efficacy of church-based, the potency and the efficacy of what you might call church-based or piety-based politics is this. Not only is it a very good mobilizer at election times, it can define an issue, it can make it moral, it can give people a sense that it's their duty to vote. It will also give them a sense of their identity, not just in and of themselves, but as against others. We are the Christians, say. We are the soldiers of Christ. But it can also supply that missing element of local participation, the feeling of belonging all year round, the feeling of community, and the feeling of politics as an expression of it. Now, whether or not that's being manipulated is perhaps not for me to say, though I think it would be the most important question. But whether or not the feeling it gives people is genuine, again, might not be for a secular commentator to make the call on. But that it is increasingly important and that it's filling up large bits of what is otherwise a somewhat vacuous political process is a fact and can't be denied.
Okay. I just have one more question, which is, I think, what we talked about before we turned the camera on. If you can just sort of think for a moment as I assume a devoted op-ed reader.
Yes.
Think of what are some of the little comforting nostrums and homilies and sort of things that our pundits like to tell us about our system, that are supposed to comfort us when things don't go our way. One of my I'll tell you, one of my personal favorites is every time there's a change of party at the presidential level, there's always a little explosion of columns about the system worked without a shot being fired.
That's right.
That's like a Hugh Sidey special. So I'm just curious and trying to take the long view of these things, not necessarily specifically about a Clinton or a Dole or anything, but just what, if anything comes to mind.
Yeah. A great deal of the work of punditry, one might very well say, I think the whole work and enterprise of punditry is that of, oh dear, something.
It's really fine.
Okay, I know, it's my fault. I'm hypersensitive to it. Sign of age. A very large part of the work of punditry, you might even say the whole project of punditry, is that of reassurance. It's of telling people that basically they're in good hands and the system works. My favorite is always the period just after the transition team has left town and the inaugural, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do it with that. Yeah, okay.
I mean, I should just tell you, I mean, our essential message of the series is not to be too cynical about the system, but on the other hand, the last thing we are is Pollyannas, and we do want to sort of have these some of the more pretentious stuff, punctured. Some of the balloons that the thumb sucking stuff.
Right. A very large part of the job of punditry, you might almost say the essence of the job of punditry in the modern world, is that of reassurance, telling people that they're in good hands, that the system works. My favorite time is always just after the transition team has left.
We're never going to get beyond that.
Darling, what did you tell them? Were you firm?
I thought I was.
The trouble is, it's very irritating that I can hear them and they apparently can't hear me. Darling!
I'm a lot more forgiving now that I have my own.
Oh,
you
sure.
know?
No, but what happens is you now realize you are the person who you used not to want to have to sit next to.
That's right. That's right.
A very great deal of the work of punditry, you might even say the whole project of punditry, is that of reassurance, of telling people that everything is fine, that the system works, that they are in good hands. I always love it when the moment of hush comes at the inauguration of a new president. And you can count on it. The commentator will remind the audience how lucky they are to see all this happening without a shot being fired, and how it's one of the splendors and glories of the United States that it's always been able to have successful and smooth transition. I can remember, for example, David Broder, who must be, I suppose, the dean of the Washington punditocracy, when President Reagan accused the press of increasing his difficulties at the time of the Iran-Contra affair, wrote an indignant column saying he couldn't understand how anyone could say this, and that he knew that he spoke for all his colleagues when he said that they would do anything to put this unpleasantness behind the American people and get on with the job of governing and renewing America. In other words, not subconsciously but explicitly and consciously taking upon himself the responsibility of consensual, orderly, smooth functioning, democratically undisturbed government. You can look to the language in other ways and see the same process at work. The word partisan is always used as a term of pejorative. The word bipartisan is always used as a term of approbation. The word divisive is the worst thing that can be applied to a politician, as if politics was not division by definition. And the entire language of consensus can be read once you've mastered it, which doesn't take frightfully long, in every headline in the New York Times, every op-ed piece in the Washington Post. Everywhere in the press except in the cartoons, as a matter of fact. And even many of those cartoons are content to represent politics as a duel between a fat donkey and a fat elephant.
So why are you interested in it? Why even cover it?
I don't. I'm not interested in it in the least. I hardly ever write about it, actually. The one thing you can't get involved, I mean, I often don't know why I live in Washington, because I'm very interested in politics, and it's the hardest place in the world to get into a political conversation. People will discuss anything but politics, if you define that as a difference over how things ought to be done. I don't remember the last time I had a real political argument in Washington. The discussions are all about who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down, why should they not be? Because that is what politics has become. But if you want to argue about how things ought to be done, how they might be different, you'll find people's eyes glaze over immediately. They realize real business is not being discussed. For that, you have to go to New York or San Francisco.
Okay.
That's great.
Do you have anything else?
No, that's perfect.
No, that's great. Now I was going to say let's get some room tone without child.
You want to say that?
Well, we probably have it somewhere in the...
You must, I should think you have got a fair bit, because we did a lot of pausing. I'm sorry you had to...
No, it's really fine.